5 a.m. I'm up with a crisp Celsius energy drink. Running 12 miles today. Grab a green juice, quick change, and head to work. Meetings, workshops. 1 more Celsius, no slowing down. Working late, but obviously still meeting the girls for a little dancing. Celsius. Live, fit, go. Grab a cold, refreshing Celsius at your local retailer or locate now at Celsius.com.
We are
Cultivate.
We are Cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I am your host, Lindsay Valenti, and joining me today is a very special guest, Gigi Berardi. Gigi Berardi hails from Hollywood and holds degrees in biology, resources and planning, and dance. A Fulbright scholar in Italy and professor at Western Washington University in Bellingham, she also teaches in Florence, Italy. She's written more than 400 reviews and articles for print media and been featured on an array of podcasts and broadcast media. Beyond writing, her other passions include dance, cheesemaking, and travel. And today, we'll be discussing her book, Bianca's Cure, which was released by She Writes Press on February 10th. Picture this: Florence, 1563. Forbidden from practicing her herbal cures in Venice, the young noblewoman Bianca Capello flees to Florence, where the ruling Medici family practices alchemy. There, she wins herself an invitation to their palace and, as well as a path to Duke Regent Francesco's bed. The impassioned bond between Francesco de' Medici and Bianca is at the core of this fact-driven deep dive into medicine, politics, love, and ultimately death in Renaissance Florence. Gigi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I had goosebumps while you were talking. I just want you to know. I'm like scared. Yeah.
I got him too. I'll be honest.
Creepy.
I got him too.
Yeah. She's with us.
She is. I think she approves. Especially the cheese making. So the book is based on the real life noblewoman Bianca Capello. Can you share with our listeners what inspired you to learn more about her and her history?
Such a good question. So I teach, as you said, I teach in Florence. I'm in Florence a lot. And I speak Italian, and the Medici are all over the place. That's their name on the Renaissance. Florence, the birthplace, if you will, of the Renaissance, of this almost 2-century period. So in the 15th century and the 16th century. So Bianca's Cure takes place in the 16th century, but the Renaissance really began 100 years before that. And the Medici were the patrons. So there is a great crime story there, and it has to do, many call it the biggest mystery of the Renaissance from that perspective. And it is that Francesco de' Medici, so her lover, then her husband, and Bianca Capello were supposedly died on the same day. But we don't really know anything about Bianca. Her body has never been found. Francesco, as the Grand Duke, as you can imagine, was taken away in grand state and laid to rest in the Medici Church of San Lorenzo and then in the Chapel of the Princes. And scientists have been asking questions about his death for a long, long time. His body has been exhumed twice to try and to look through remnants of organs and any kind of organic matter that's there for evidence of malaria, of the parasites and damage you'd expect from malaria, and also evidence of arsenic poisoning. And that is the question. Was he poisoned? Was he poisoned by his brother, Ferdinando, who became the Grand Duke afterwards? or did he die of malaria? So I knew about that and I was interested in it. I was intriguing. But what really got me interested was one day I was walking across a central piazza in Florence with the person I was living with, Anna Maria, and we were in this piazza, which eventually would become one of the main settings for my novel. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, Gigi, just turn around and look behind you. What do you see? And there was an open window. And I also saw Ferdinando, this duke from the
Mm-hmm.
1500s, looking at the window. And she said, the spirit of Bianca Capello lives there. And if they close the window, if the window is closed, she screams. So then
Mm.
I went into the Hotel Loggiata dei Serviti, this hotel that happens to be one of Rick Steves, the travel writer's favorite hotels anyway. And I asked around surreptitiously, have you heard a scream? And they said, yes. And so I got very interested in this story about the powerful spirit of a woman that might still be in Florence in this 21st century, and and also the power that she had over Francesco. So theirs was a huge love story by all accounts. She was beautiful, of course, as you might think, a
Mm-hmm.
babe, but I thought there must be something more to this. And then there was one other piece that fell into place for me, and that is that in this central palace in Florence, Palazzo Vecchio, which had been the palace of the Medicis when they were ruling, and it's now a civil government office today.
Sure.
But that palace pretty much looks like it did then, and what it has is secret rooms. And there's a number of secret
Mm.
rooms. Francesco had his, which is called the studiolo, like a
Mm-hmm.
studiolo. How cute, with a little masculine end to it. And
Mm-hmm.
it consists of lavish and intricate and gorgeous paintings, but also hidden cabinets inside,
Okay.
and doors and other panels for his little treasures. From there is a secret stairway to another secret room, which was his father's, Cosimo, the great Duke. And
Okay.
then we know that Bianca had her own. So Francesco gave her, Bianca Capello, in my book, Francesco gave her own study. And that is also part of the secret tour you can take in Palazzo Vecchio. And there she was able to look down at the magnificent ballroom of the 500. It's called the Hall of the 500, a huge
Mm-hmm.
ballroom. But I really think she was about more than spying on a few people in
Yeah.
brocade and pearls. So it was known that she had collections there too. So this was actually her study, and now we know also that Francesco and Bianca were great alchemists, and that was part of their attraction
Mm-hmm.
with each other, that they were interested in alchemy. In the book, Bianca's Cure is trying to kind of morph that alchemy into a more systematic science so that she can cure the disease that she thinks is going to kill Francesco, and that's malaria.
So that's a really good segue to my next question, which is, what types of research did you conduct in order to tell this story and not only tell the story, but portray the time and period in which it takes place?
I have everything from original letters that Bianca Capello wrote when she was Grand Duchess, because those have been archived, and there's been a number of books that have come out which have great primary and secondary sources
Mm-hmm.
in them. And one of my touchstones is called The Duke in Love, Il Ducato Innamorato. And I read it first in Italian and then in English. And that's written by Stefano Corazzini, who is actually a docent of Palazzo
Okay.
Vecchio, as well as a professor. And he and I have become great friends because basically he wrote the nonfiction, creative nonfiction
Sure.
story of Francesco and Bianca, and I wrote the fictionalized version.
Sure.
And to try and get at some of what you were saying, that is the setting, the mood, the dangers. I first wrote the book from this standpoint of Francesco, and that was
Oh, really?
100,000 words, and I threw them all
Wow.
away. I
Wow.
know. I know. Even today, if I have to give up a paragraph, I'm not happy. So 100,000 words, but the story was a little dry and it read more like a Wikipedia article. So what
Sure.
I wanted to do to kind of channel a little bit what Bianca's, fears and shame and discoveries were, I I decided to write this from the perspective of kind of mood and tone. And so
Mhm.
I would take a situation and she would react, in one of 8 ways, panicked. And then I would write a couple of paragraphs. And then
Mhm.
from that, in that mood, just to see what fit. And I feel like I have a pretty good handle on Florence just because I've been in Florence for so long.
Sure.
And every single thing in Florence related to the Renaissance really reflects back on these Medici from the 1400s and the 1500s. So
Mhm.
including what their houses looked like, what the codexes looked like, the manuscripts. 1 in 8 women were nuns in Florence at this time,
Wow.
according to a really interesting book called Daughters of Alchemy. And this was a place where women could feel safe practicing the research, whether it was in
Mhm.
science, whether it's in art, whether it was illustration. And that's why it's not unusual that this was the first place Bianca found in the book to do her work, to try and work on her experiments,
Mhm. So, as a noblewoman from Venice, kinda how did she end up in Florence?
right? So this we know, that she was about 14 or 15 years old, that her father had who she didn't get along with. In my story, her father was a big patron of sick houses. He was very concerned
Sure.
about disease. Her mother died young, and in fact, that's part of the setting for in the beginning for her. And what I write is that she knew that alchemy was practiced, a kind of scientific alchemy in Florence. It was the beginning of chemistry, and you needed
Sure.
equipment for the chemistry. And the Medici had this. The Medici had these secret rooms in Palazzo Vecchio, but also Francesco, the younger person
Mhm.
that she meets, Francesco, before he becomes Duke, had his own laboratory called the casino. And the
Mhm.
casino was next to a garden. In this garden, a very young Michelangelo was discovered when he was 14 years old, 13, as a sculptor by Lorenzo the Magnificent. So we know that there were these buildings in the area of San Marco, the monastery of San Marco, which was a Medici monastery, as were
Mhm.
many of the monasteries there. So in the book, she knows that she can find the Medici. She thinks she can. She knows that she can find what she thinks is a famous apothecary, a famous nunnery, a famous sick
Mhm.
house, and that's what gets her. And that's the motivation. The for getting to Florence, the way she does it is she meets a person from Florence who is working for the Salviati Bank, and her father is involved with the Salviati Bank also. She meets him and she realizes that's her ticket out of
Mhm.
Venice, and he goes home to Florence and he takes her with her and they marry. In fact, the Medici are friends with her father and arrange for a very quick marriage. She's pregnant. with
Hmm.
Piero. That's his name, Piero's child, the person who works for the Salviati Bank.
Yeah. So Bianca had kind of dedicated her life to finding a cure for malaria. And what inspired her to do this? And sort of why was her pursuing this like so groundbreaking?
So I would say the inciting incident was her mother dying.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
her mother taught her how to see plants, and that is its own kind of alchemy, that kind of
Mhm.
science that is so phenomenologically based, or it's so based in observation and perception. That's not really the scientific method. Not even looking for patterns, just observing what's there. And her mother taught her that. We would call something like that, a Goethean science, say.
Mhm.
And she was building off of her mother's work. The plant that was of interest was Artemisia. And Artemisia is a flowering plant in the daisy or aster family, and there are literally hundreds of species. So Artemisia Artemisia vulgaris is mugwort. Artemisia
Okay.
annua is sweet Annie. Artemisia absinthe is wormwood, from which we get absinthe. And in fact, and vermouth, the word vermouth is actually a German word, which means wormwood. And
Okay.
so the vermouth is pretty bitter. It's used to flavor Manhattan cocktails and vermouth spritzes, and it's strong and it's bitter. And so she was very interested in this plant, in the roots, in the stem, in the leaves, in the early flowers, in the late flowers, but it was all an experiment. And she had no patience really, other than
Mhm.
herself or whatever she could find. And so as a young girl, she finds herself in sick houses until her father finds out and stops
Mhm.
her. And really, she needs to leave pretty much at
Yeah.
that point, and meets Piero soon after that.
As we've kind of discussed, Bianca ends up gaining the attention of Francesco de
Mm.
Medici. And sort of for our listeners who may not know, I mean, you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but can you provide sort of a brief overview of like the Medici family's historical importance in not only Italy, but just like in the whole of the Renaissance, essentially?
So I get a lot of practice doing this, and people in Florence love to talk about the Medici family, right?
Yeah.
Medici, by the way, means doctors, means,
Okay.
yeah, which is interesting. I'll make this really as short as possible. There are actually two branches of the Medici family,
Okay.
and one is in the 1400s. And the most famous Medici we know of is Lorenzo the Magnificent, who discovered Michelangelo and the other boys who were artists and took them down the road to the Medici Palace. And then towards the end of the 1400s, there was a crazed, rabid, but maybe he had some good ideas, I don't know, monk called Savonarola. And Savonarola eventually was burned at the stake in the Piazza della Signoria. But for a while in the San Marco Monastery, where that I said was a Medici monastery, he overturned the Medici and said, we don't need any royalty. What Florence
Mm.
needs is a republic. And so he created a republic. He went into Palazzo Vecchio. The big ballroom that we have now was tiny. And he said, I'm making this bigger, and we're going to call it the Hall of the 500. And we're going
Okay.
to have 500 representatives. It was like this democratic republic.
Sure.
And so the Medici were overthrown. That's the 1400s. 1500s, early part, the wealthy families, and the Medici have become bankers now. They've established banking. They've got banks
Mhm.
in places almost, well, I won't say all over the world, but in many, many locations.
Sure.
They're rich.
Sure.
And so are other Florentine families. They're also patrons of the arts. So Botticelli and I mean, all these magnificent Renaissance artists had the Medici as their patrons. But anyway,
Sure.
Savonarola came, but then he left. So in the 1500s, people are looking around for someone who can become a prince, who can be a Medici prince again. And there is a young Medici, Alessandro, but he doesn't last very long. And then comes along Cosimo, who's Francesco's father, Cosimo. And at the age of 17, this dashing militarist becomes the ruler of Florence. And of course, he wants to be the ruler of Tuscany too. And the Pope and Holy Roman Emperor make him a Grand Duke eventually. So here he is. He comes from a family that's very strong. His father was a soldier, and his grandmother was Caterina Sforza, and she herself was an alchemist from Milan. She was also a counselor. She was in government, and she was also leading armies. And
Wow.
there's a famous story about her that when they had her and they had her children in particular, captured, she went out into a balcony. This is a little over dramatized if you
Sure.
read literature, but she
Sure.
lifted up her skirts and said, "I don't care, I can make more." So she was very badass. Yeah. And so the grandson Cosimo, yeah, shocker, he's an alchemist too, but he's also a really strong extrovert. And he's a huge patron of the arts. So hence the Renaissance continues in this with patronage and with the Uffizi in Florence is like the Louvre of Italy. His son Francesco, though, is an introvert, and all he wants to do is read books and study. And he's the oldest one of not quite a dozen children, but he's the oldest one. The youngest one, Ferdinando, ends up becoming a cardinal at the age of 13, and ultimately Francesco's nemesis. So Ferdinando's always giving him a hard time. He's called the cardinal in the book.
Yes.
Giving Francesco a hard time, but he's a bookworm basically, but he has dreams of creating a porcelain, a Medici porcelain, not a Chinese porcelain, a Medici paste porcelain outside of China. And with alchemy, he does that. There's about a 7-year period, and we have 80 pieces still in the world today. You can go to the Met in New York City or the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and there's pockets of these pieces elsewhere, and you can see the porcelain that was created, the porcelain that he touched. But if you go to those places, if you see the porcelain, you'll see that there's a woman on the porcelain. It was produced like maybe 1580 to 1587, and I believe the woman on the plates and the cups and the bowls is Bianca Capello. It's not his wife. So Francesco, in the meantime, has married into the Holy Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire. He's married a Habsburg. He has many, many children. Most of the males, if there are any, have died. And the only son that is surviving is the one he has with Bianca Capello, and that's Antonio. Eventually, Joanna, his wife, has a son, but they die, Joanna and the son, mysteriously, according to some. So then that means that Francesco can marry Bianca Capello, and he does, and Antonio becomes the heir to the Grand Duchy.
Going back to Bianca, like she faces quite a bit of opposition regarding her cures, in part because she's a woman, and we all know that song and dance. But what were some of her sort of biggest oppositions that she faced, both in Venice and then also once she came to Florence?
I think we can look at the external opposition. I think that's what
Sure.
you're talking about, and the internal opposition. But in Venice, her father's trying to stop her. Young
Mhm.
girls aren't doing experiment with his wife's witchy sisters, is
Sure.
what he said. So she's facing her father, just wanting her to marry and wanting her to settle down. In Florence, I should say back in Venice, her mother dies while she's trying to cure her. So
Mhm.
that is going to give her motivation, but also give her a lot of concerns too, because as she says in the book, my mother wasn't sick until she was. Because Francesco is saying, how is it that you have never been sick, Bianca? Look at your skin. Look at your skin. So Bianca means white. So Bianca
Sure.
Capello is white hat, but whatever. Bianca is white, so her skin is pale,
Mhm.
and Francesco's is mottled and marked from these bouts of malaria
Mhm.
that he's had. And she said, I don't know, maybe it's a smell. And sure enough, we now know that to some extent, citrus smells or other strong smells can be a bit of a deterrent to the vector
Mhm.
of the disease, maybe under certain circumstances. But then she says, but my mother was well until she fell deathly ill. So it's always a concern. When she gets to Venice, the first laboratory that she finds is with a nunnery, basically, a
Mhm.
hospital, right on that square that I was talking about that has the
Sure.
open window. In the book, it's called Santa Elisabetta. Today, that's actually the Ospedale degli Innocenti, the Hospital of the Innocents. Because
Okay.
for years, this is creepy, for years, it was an orphanage of sorts. And Florence was famous, many medieval and late Middle Ages towns in Europe had hospitals and orphanages, and Florence had at least a dozen of these. Later on, there was actually a turnstile created outside the orphanage so that women could come and put their babies on the turnstile, which would, it's a wheel, they call it, and the
Mhm.
wheel would rotate in and a nun would take the baby. And that's how they would relinquish their babies. Oftentimes what they did was they had a bit of jewelry that they could break in two, and they would leave half with the baby and half with themselves, thinking that maybe someday they would be able to take care of the baby and they'd find the baby. And in fact, it is a UNICEF heritage and UNESCO, but UNICEF heritage site as an orphanage, because you can go there today and you can see the cabinets that has the baby's name and the little bit of jewelry that was left behind.
Wow.
It's heartbreaking. And this went on into the 1800s. Anyway, so she sees this place as one of healing. And so
Mhm.
she wants to get inside, and so she does. And she forms a friendship with Sister Angelica.
Mhm.
But they have a disaster. The title of the chapter in Bianca's Cure is The Blunder That Couldn't Be Buried. And a girl
Oh.
dies under her care.
Mhm.
And so that's becomes like an internal a demon for her, because she makes her
Yeah.
very, very cautious in what she's doing. But she's basically thrown out of there. She throws herself out of there, and then she literally runs into Francesco in the streets, and he falls in love with her immediately and says, I'm inviting you to a ball. And once she goes to the ball with Piero, this husband,
Mhm.
remember, from Venice, who she
Yep.
ditches, they start their affair. Francesco really isn't an an obstacle to her, but all the men who work for Francesco are in his
Mhm.
secret laboratories. And so she has to find another place, and she does, in Michelangelo's garden, which is overrun by weeds. And she
Mhm.
clears it, and it becomes a little laboratory for her and a garden of cures. The biggest obstacle is Ferdinando, the cardinal, who
Yes.
believes in God and, and wants to, doesn't want anything to do with this science or alchemy, and thinks his brother is incapable of ruling. And so he becomes the biggest threat, to the point of, and this is a question in the story, does he poison them, or does he poison his brother Francesco?
As you mentioned, Bianca and Francesco have like a rather long affair during which he suffers from several bouts of malaria.
Hmm.
Just how common was the illness at that time and kind of how widespread were its effects?
I was just reading about Norway today, because I'm giving a presentation in a few months to the Daughters of Norway. Like,
Oh, cool.
widespread. I know, right? So why widespread, in a word. There's several different forms of malarial vectors, of mosquitoes, obviously different species.
Mhm.
There is falciparum. There's a species that is very common in tropical countries, tropical
Mhm.
areas, and that is a deadly malarial virus with, a disease from the mosquito that has a fever that spikes
Mhm.
repeatedly. There's another one, and in this malarial mosquito, Virax, Virax, the fever is repeated every 3 or 4 days, and it has to do with the life cycle of the parasite itself, through laying eggs and
Oh,
hatching
wow.
eggs in the blood,
Oh.
the meal of the blood that it gets from biting. So it has to be female,
Sure.
and because that's how that because then that virus propagates itself. And I haven't said anything before to anyone about this, but anyway, a number of years ago, I was in Kenya. My partner has worked in Kenya for dozens and dozens of years, and I've been there a number of times, and I did not get malaria, although he's had malaria, but I did get a roundworm, which was
Oh,
completely disgusting, because the life cycle is that it buries into your lungs, and then it kind of bursts open, and it's circulating through your, anyway. But there's medication you can take to expel it.
yes,
but
yes.
but it I just have some of that image into what this disease is like. So first is to know that there's many kinds of malaria. I just talked about
Sure.
the two most common ones in Europe. And even into Scandinavian countries, malaria in marshy areas that showed the tertiary or quaternary fever picture was not uncommon. And you did find the more deadly forms, especially in warmer and southern Mediterranean climates. In Florence at this time, it was common. I mean, the word that we use today to describe the disease, malaria, is actually an Italian word. So it comes from malaria, which is bad air. The thought was bad air
Oh,
was
okay.
causing the malaria. Now, that moniker, I think, is from the 1800s. It's not from the 1500s.
Sure.
But just to say that it's been a problem, and allegedly it was Mussolini who, well, not allegedly, but in the archival record, Mussolini, who'd cleared a lot of the coastal swamps, in particular in Tuscany, of cleared them in terms of draining the swamps, so taking away the habitat for the mosquito vector.
Mhm.
They didn't have that option. They were understanding at the time in 1580, 1570, the time of Bianca's cure. So Bianca has an idea that that maybe there's an herb that can help, because she comes from a family of wise women, of alchemists. We know that there's many women alchemists. In fact, last Friday, a German artist who had been invited in Milan opened an exhibit on the women alchemists, and it's the forgotten
Oh,
women
cool.
alchemists, which include Caterina Sforza, the woman I was talking about,
Sure.
yeah, and also Isabella Cortese. And so in
Okay.
my book, Bianca comes from this family of women, the Cortese, and Cortese is actually an anagram. And
Okay.
it's an anagram for segreto, Segreto. The words are in the Cortese, and it means secret. So she comes from that
Oh.
family, and they were not aligned with her mother, but still she would have grown up in their palace and watching them work with recipes. So she has the herb, it's important to her, and that's what she's doing experiments with and trying to fight her father, trying to fight Ferdinando. But she's also very scared because at a certain point, like a question comes up, how strategic was she? How Machiavellian? How driven was she? Or did she really love Francesco? I think she did. And at a
Mhm.
point, she says, when did this change? That instead of wanting to cure the whole world, she was focused on the one man in front of her. What's interesting is that in 2015, a Chinese person won the Nobel Prize in a scientific category and was the first person from mainland China, if you can believe that, to win a Nobel Prize. And it happened to be
Wow.
in the scientific category in physiology or medicine, and it happened to be Tu Yuyu, who is about 90 years old today. I'm in touch with her lab, but she won the Nobel Prize for isolating the active ingredient in artemisia that cures malaria. And it is
Oh,
still
wow.
used today. hmm
That's
So the
so
book, in a
crazy.
sense, is a tribute to her. And she looked at thousands of years of text in China, in different regions of China, looking at artemisia as a curative. And artemisia is
Mhm.
very fickle. If it's heated too high, heated too much, then that active component becomes inactive. It's less effective, the artemisinin. So in Bianca's cure, she's experimenting. She's experimenting with
Mhm.
distillations, but maybe that's not going to work. Maybe it's something that can't be distilled because it's heated too high. So then elsewhere
Mhm.
in the book, she tries a bain-marie, a water bath, which will, it's kind of like a double boiler, right? So that
Sure.
the fudge or whatever it is, sugar doesn't get too overheated in the internal little pot. She was using that. Maybe it's a cold diffusion. Well, this is something that actually 2UU systematically looked at. And she did not have a medical degree and she did not have a science degree. She was a pharmacist, basically. She had some training in in extracting and extruding chemical components, and she had an understanding of these Chinese texts, and using that, she came up with artemisia as the cure.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So, besides the version you note in your novel, are there any other theories you found in your research that were particularly interesting, kind of surrounding the deaths of Francesco and Bianca?
It, it's really interesting. So remember, we're looking at let's say the last 7 years of Francesco's life.
Sure.
We could say Francesco and Bianca, but I do leave that question open.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at the last 7 years. It's a time of great productivity, actually. 2 or 3 interesting things are happening. They get married. His family mysteriously dies, wife and children, some children. They get married. He has this fabulous, fantastic water wonderland park outside of Florence called Pratolino. And he builds it for himself. He builds it for his love, Bianca. And she, of
Mm-hmm.
course, sees this as a way to have yet another very reliable laboratory. So she agrees to marry him if he can give her this laboratory. But
Mm-hmm.
it's still not enough, because she has the laboratory, but she doesn't have patients. She doesn't have enough of a database. And she
Mm-hmm.
says, what's really important is I have to watch what happens to this disease, how it progresses from the very beginning to the end, to know what dose to give, to know how
Mm-hmm.
powerful a treatment I need, because otherwise I might kill them, like maybe the girl at Santa Elisabetta or her
Mm-hmm.
mother. And
Yep.
Francesco agrees to be her guinea pig. Francesco agrees
Mm-hmm.
to be her patient. And also at this time, his porcelain is being manufactured, which is a huge accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually seeing that come into being. He's established also an institute, the Kruska Institute, for basically language and literature. And in the book, that becomes also a place of practicing, presenting what your work. It becomes, we
Mm-hmm.
would call it a conference today, conferences or academic
Sure.
societies. And that becomes a place where maybe Bianca can present what she's found so far and get feedback and have some kind of interaction like we expect scientists to do today. And she
Yeah.
dabbles in that, but then Francesco falls sick. So
Mm-hmm.
they die, or he does, at another villa, which is a number of kilometers outside Florence, Poggio a Caiano. And the death is mysterious. We don't know if it's arsenic. We don't know if it is malaria. And we hear that Francesco is then transported to the San Lorenzo Chapel, the Church of the Medicis, and Ferdinando says famously, Bianca, throw her body anywhere. You can go and throw Bianca's body anywhere. She's not a Medici, as
Yeah.
perhaps she was dying. And so you can see how this would captivate people's
Yeah.
attention. And
Mm-hmm.
it brings in the church in so many ways, the Catholic Church too. So Ferdinando was a cardinal pretty much from the age of 13. As soon as Francesco dies, he's not a cardinal anymore. He's like, I don't need it. It's all right. Duke, Grand Duke,
Mm-hmm.
I can do this. And so he
Yep.
somehow leaves cardinalhood and marries into the Lorraine family. And so we have the little Lorraine dynasty coming into the Medici dynasty. And now we're at the decline of the Renaissance, soon after the whole art and literature is on the decline from what it was in its heyday in the 1400s and
Sure.
1500s. And he has children, and the children become Grand Duke, so to speak, but again, it's kind of on the decline. So that is mysterious too. How did that happen? And so we have today Ferdinando, the cardinal, looking at the open window, coming back to the open window, and we're wondering if he is looking into the heart of Bianca, but she's not going to let him have it, because
Mm-hmm.
her spirit is hers, as long as the window is open.
I love that so much. So, can you kind of share with our listeners kind of what your other novels were about if they wanted to read more of your work?
Yeah, the first book is called Finding Balance, and that is about the body. So I have degrees in dance and in biology, and I'm very interested in conditioning and technique in dance.
Sure.
And I co-started a journal, Kinesiology and Medicine for Dance, which is now the Journal of Dance Medicine and Science. And I'm a dance critic. So I love to look at dance and the challenges that people face in terms of the dancers face conditioning their bodies and staying injury free. But it was a
Sure.
creative nonfiction exploration of how can we use science, the science of kinesiology and biomechanics to make us better dancers. The second
Sure.
book came out 5 years ago, and that's called Food Wise. That book was looking at the mind, science in the mind, because it's on food beliefs. WISE is an acronym. W for whole foods, I for being informed, S for sustainability, and E for experiencing foods, WISE. And I have developed this food WISE system so that food choices are easy. You don't have to have WISE all the time, every meal, every day. One of those, whole or informed or food that's sustainable or just experiencing the taste, is enough. And I talk about the large world of food production and processing all over the world and how we can make sense of that in terms of ecological constraints and the science
Sure.
behind that, biodiversity. But then I talk about our personal world of food, and I raise some uncomfortable questions about, well, like, is fat really that bad? What does fat do in
Mhm.
the body? Or how important is it to have consistent taste when you have something called artisan food production, where every loaf of
Sure.
bread is going to taste a little different? It's not going to be a consistent Wonder Bread, for example. So
Sure. Sure.
I look at the science uh, um, of sensory taste. I look at molecular models that computer scientists have built from MIT. Stephanie Seneff, looking at the metabolic pathways of sulfur in the body, which is considered a very alchemic element, very esoteric, mysterious sulfur, which we don't get enough of these days. And she's saying that that combined with the very high processed fat and low saturated fat in our diets is causing some confusion for our bodies. So these are really
Mm.
just questions I ask, but you can see how it's really using the mind, the information. And then Bianca's Cure is really about the science of the spirit. And the science that I'm looking at is alchemy,
Mhm.
pre-science, some call it pre-chemistry, and chemistry. And I'm looking at that transition to a more systematic way of looking at the world as we see in science today, but without losing the ability for flow and to be lost in observation and not to be so set on finding patterns in nature when maybe they don't actually exist. And
Mhm.
maybe by not conforming to kind of a set of procedures of doing science, we're going to make awesome discoveries like Bianca Capello's face using
Mhm.
alchemic dyes might be on a piece of porcelain in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. How did that
Yeah.
happen?
Before we start to wind down, is there anything else we didn't discuss about Bianca's Cure that you'd like to share with our listeners?
One of the main characters in the book is Florence itself. So,
I would agree, yes.
Florence, the setting of Florence is very important. And one thing I'm hoping is that people who read Bianca's Cure will visit Florence and try and find and be in and savor some of the same places that Bianca was in and Francesco was in. You don't need to go to Florence in a tour bus with 40 other people. That there
Sure.
is such a way to find the secret rooms in the secret palaces, the sites of the old apothecaries, the orphanages that have the turnstile for the baby to be deposited by the mother, the piazza of the Holy Annunciation, or it's also called of the Two Fountains with the open window, to just
Mhm.
go and just experience what this very hot and pretty uncomfortable place in July and August in particular is like. And
Mhm.
seeing that, in fact, when you can imagine the pollution coming from in the area of the Arno River and its very still waters before it was engineered, that
Mhm.
what the motivation was for finding a cure for malaria, but also
Yeah.
for finding out finding out how it is that the world works. Francesco was so interested in dyes but also solvents and pigmentations for his porcelain, and that comes from having a wild imagination. So I am hoping that rather than being a Disneyland full of tourists, which is what some Florentines say, it becomes this amazing playground for discovery. And you can pay €30 and hop on the number 25 bus at the train station in Florence and go to Pratolino. It's not difficult to find. And there you still see the giant Colossus Apennine that has the deep swimming caves of sulfur water in them. You can't actually see into it, but you can imagine, and you can still see the Colossus. Or
Sure.
supposedly where ice cream was invented. Buontalenti had his caves that the Medici used, these caves of ice, so they were, very cool and very dry sometimes, and they could actually preserve ice, supposedly giving birth to ice cream, and we still have his name associated with the flavor, Buontalenti. That's magic. Ice cream is magic.
That's so cool. Well, I would like to thank Gigi for taking the time to join me today. And again, the book is Bianca's Cure, which is available in ebook and paperback. And we will include a link in the show notes so you can purchase a copy in whatever format you prefer. And thank you so much again, Gigi. And on that note, I'm Lindsay, and we'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.
Thank you so much.